Good morning. I am going to put on this light so that I have extra visual here. I am making a podcast for J. Edgar Hoover. Now, I'm doing this podcast. I'm just waking up. So I've done this podcast several times. And each time I have some kind of technical difficulty. One of them that my sound isn't working. Another one, I don't have the share screen didn't work. So I mean, it was like Mercury retrograde, and I have some challenges this way. I was born under a few retrogrades, one Jupiter retrograde and Saturn retrograde. So I set out to do things, and sometimes they just don't happen the way I planned. And no big deal. But here I am today. I'm not going to give up because I feel like this chart, excuse me, my eyes are bothering me. This chart is so interesting for maybe understanding what is happening politically to all of us right now. J. Edgar Hoover was someone who really founded the FBI, one, and two, he was somebody who came up with a system of cataloging, documenting, and keeping people's fingerprints, for which that began to store data on our personal. Now, I'm not sure that that's exactly where the data, our personal data got stored, but it was kind of like the first really overt political movement to get our data stored in such a public way. And why might I be saying it that way? Well, I think there's always unintended consequences. The term in the class that we use is blowback. This is an unintended consequence. That a well-intended idea, which having fingerprints is a good idea. We can locate children if they something happens. Supposedly we can find criminals when they've done things on a crime scene, So there's things why we want fingerprints. It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. But in some ways, it's also maybe wasn't protected enough for all of us. Why do I say that? Well, it seems as though I'm going to have a sip of coffee. It seems as though now, to be a young person in our world, you're pretty well, you can plan on, you don't have any privacy. Everything about your life, if you make a video and you show a body part and you're a teenager, that's forever out there. Don't underestimate that. You might remove it, but somewhere on some server, it was out there, and you can't get rid of them. You just because even if you, like I said, delete it and it's deleted from your account, it still got put on a server somewhere. It's still out there, right? So information, the way it gets stored now, before it was in like a catalog library, right? You go to a research room and you look for fingerprints through a catalog system. That is no longer the case. Now it's just automatic. You go online and boom, there it is. You can find out anything about anyone, and privacy no more, which is really troubling to me because, at what point have we given up more than we should have? Probably, it could be largely argued we've given up way more than we should have. And here we are. So J. Edgar Hoover, I'm going to start in the 12th house where he has Mercury. He has Mercury in Capricorn. Capricorn is saying, I'm government. I'm an institution. 12th house is saying I'm institutions. Institutions are nursing homes, hospitals, prisons. The 12th house is going to be unseen, and it is also going to be your enemies. Just put that in the back of your pocket. Think about it. Put it somewhere where you remember I said that. Now we're going to move on to his first house, Sun in Capricorn. And the first house is concerned with survival, asserting, adventure, something new. A new creative idea. And what did he do? A new creative idea. Venus, concerned with making money, concerned with government, again, because it's it's in Capricorn. Venus in Capricorn is saying, I really want to make some money. It's not really, Capricorn's not a great place for Venus. It's kind of cold for the planet of love. So not really what we would call it's not well placed. In psychological astrology, we're not using detriment and all that kind of thing. Now, I do study those things because I think it's very beneficial for me to know as much about how to calculate and understand the stars. And I don't believe anyone science has it figured out. So I try to understand it to the best of my ability and spit it out the best I can, the way I understand it, with hopefully a little broader perspective. And hopefully I'm not butchering my professor's good hard work that he's done on me. So, I don't ever want to disparage. But this guy, J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the FBI, was somebody who was very creative. I would even suspect singly focused, perhaps autistic. I say that because it's a spot it, you got it thing, right? I have autistic spectrum disorder, and I swear I see it in him. He is stoic in the way that I would assume stoic, relationship trouble, all of the things that, now, not to say that people who are autistic are always going to have relationship troubles, but I think that it's pretty well founded that we do tend to not as necessarily know how to blend and get along. And sometimes, it leads to misunderstandings. And so this would be an example of autism. And in his case, I think he had a case of social autism, just social. And mine is in language, and it really affected my early development. I'm not saying it didn't his. I'm certain it did, because his moon in the second house suggests that something happened in his early development. In fact, his first house suggests that perhaps his beginnings were a little on the rougher side, but that's using what we call the age developmental model. And it doesn't mean that it wasn't something rather benign. Like, for instance, he had a brother born or a sister, or, any of those kind of things, in his first year, and in his second year, maybe somebody fell and broke an arm, or, whatever. There, different things can happen and be representative. So I want to say that because I'm reading this chart and I'm applying certain theories and principles, doesn't mean I am going to get this exactly right. Because one really important detail, I haven't interviewed him. And that's important in astrology. If I don't have the opportunity to interview someone, I miss details. So fair disclosure, that can happen. Now, second house, I can give you a very basic rough over, and it'll be true, because the truth is that the planetary placements, sign and house, expresses a certain set of needs and circumstances and actors and a play that is going to look similar. Now, not exactly the same, because we're individuals and we each have the ability to live up to our chart in various ways through character. But in his second house in Pisces, he has the moon, and the moon represents mother. Moon in Pisces is going to associate with Neptune, which is going to mean he had some confusion. The boundaries between him and his mother might have been rather unclear, maybe confusing, dissolved. Maybe they were enmeshed. Perhaps the way they saw each other was obviously mother and son. I'm not going to take that from them. But their boundaries were poor, perhaps. Perhaps mother and son were really more like lovers without the sexual connection. Because I think she was a good mother. I think she, in the second house, Pisces maybe strength, but in the second house, you're going to gather that's about objects. That's about object identification. That's a time where you're going to get pretty solid, and feel pretty good about yourself at age 3 through 5, where you're going to start kind of letting go of mom, and you're going to start hanging on to something else. You're going to identify something with something else. Object identification. It's normal development. I would say that in his second house and his age 2 to 5, that there might have been some disturbing things that were taking place in his emotional development, but not in his home life. He probably had a home, the bedroom, a living room, mom in an apron, everything looked perfect, right? So that right there might be the source of his deeper confusion, is right here, Pisces. Pisces is the planet of death, crisis, dissolving. Let's move on to the third house in Mars, in Taurus, which refers back to that second house where it says that, his assertiveness is related to his home life, where he's being taught by his mother, who he has perhaps a rather blended and enmeshed relationship. So the question here is, how is Mars going to function? Well, Taurus is a yin house, and Mars is a yang energy. So I suspect it's going to be misfiring in the house of information. So some of his information is going to be less than solid. How he asserts himself, Mars, your super identity, fire. If you look up here at the top of the chart, fire is 0. He has no fire. And Mars is the gift of asserting fire. And in his first house, where he would have to dispose of, or you would think of, it's earth-based. It's earth-based. So no fire. So his internal id, his super ID, his super ego is kind of earthy. Kind of think about that. Soft, gentle, kind. And it points back up to an earth-based house that's in water. Very confusing. Between the earth and water, where does he stand? It's easy to understand why sometimes difficult charts can create confusion for the character that's being developed. So what do you have here? You have Mars opposition Saturn in Scorpio. So something about his ability to assert is opposed in the house of government in some penetrating way. He has some limitations. So the question is, does he even feel like a man? Does he feel like he's capable of asserting himself as a man? That would be questionable. The way that Saturn sits, it looks like he feels impotent, because generally Saturn in the 8th house, which, Scorpio would be the 8th house. Now this is in the 10th house. So impotent in government is what this is saying. But he was so successful. How could that possibly be? Well, there was a shocking and unexpected story that took place. Uranus in Scorpio, something rather penetrating in government and different. What would that be? Well, we would have to go back and look at his sun to understand that a little better, how he develops who he is, his ID, his ego, how he sees himself. And I don't mean to use the word ID because it sounds like I'm talking about a driver's license. Maybe I am. His driver's license, his ability to drive his soul through this lifetime was impaired. Okay. And we're all impaired. We wouldn't be here if we weren't impaired. And because we're here to work out whatever it is that we agreed to work out. But here you see this quincunx What is a quincunx? Well, it is a line that is blue, and it looks like it's standing on a sawhorse. Maybe something needs to be reconstructed, right? A quincunx is a division of a house. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses away. And it has nothing in common with this other house, nothing. And what is it pointing to? Pluto and Pisces. Pisces. Let us go back to that moon in Pisces. This is a real theme in his chart, how he relates to his mother. Again, let me explain. Fifth house is going to be high school years. It's going to be competitive. It's going to be when you go into sports and write a playwright and practice drama. And his is in information. His high school years, I'm certain, were rough. Maybe not in the sense that he probably had enough money and support at home that it appeared probably on the surface that he just whipped right through them and no big deal. But his chart, again, suggests that might not be the truth. That might be the pipe dream. Pluto, Neptune, and Jupiter, all in Gemini. Fifth house is saying, this is where I go and I learn about who I am. I date, I go to high school, I go to the prom, I have my first experiences. I sort of develop into who I am as not just Edgar Hoover, but also potentially as Edgar Hoover in partnership. Edgar Hoover with another person. We get into high school and we start dating, we start coupling, we start trying to figure that out. And his is in information. So what might that mean, given this is a quincunx? Well, it means that there's a sexual aspect to it, a shadowy sexual aspect to it. I would say that it's very possible that he was gay and didn't know it. That how he identified was he looked up to the strong man, thus believing he was attracted to men and their strength, very possibly was. But additionally, his relationship with his mother would have created massive confusion in his ability to have relationships with women, most likely. So, how would have that manifested in his soul? Well, if you notice, he's got this quincunx from Mercury to Neptune. He might have been deceptive. He's got Pluto to Mercury and the sun. He might have saw things about you sexually, because in order to spot something, you have to have it. Okay, spot it, you got it. Myself, I have plenty of that I could share with you that's relevant. But we're not talking about me. We're talking about Edgar Hoover. He identified as a gay man. And you can see in the sixth house, where we think of it as service, that is in Gemini, opposing Mercury, that he may have collected information, the details, lots of information about people he was opposed to, or his opponents, his political opponents, people who didn't believe what he was doing was right or believed in him. So how can a man that is not a strong man, as he would like to be up to such shenanigans? Well, I don't believe they were shenanigans. I believe he was brilliant. And I believe that a lot of this was his shadow, his subconscious. He was unaware of it. And in fact, an interesting side note, and not a side note, a very massive detail about who he was. is that initially when he set up the FBI, he hired his wingman. And if you paid attention to him at all, he had a list of things that the FBI agents needed to have, like they needed a college education. There was several features for which he really required. He was mean about it. He wanted you to come into this completely put together in ways maybe he wasn't so put together. So his shadow, Pluto, right? That quincunx, he collected data about you that was sexual in nature so that he could use it against you later to have his way politically. Boy, doesn't that sound like some time worry. And that's largely why I think this chart's interesting, is he's a founder of how our government works. Now, he's not responsible for the outcomes. We are, all of us, every single one of us, because we basically say, oh yeah, you go ahead, government, you handle the situation. I'm not concerned with what you're going to do. And that's a mistake that we make. And perhaps this is why we're in such a pickle at this time. It's very possible. So let's move on to Saturn in the 10th house, where he works in government. This is saying this guy is the top cop in Scorpio. He built what cop talk is all about, made the book, right? He's brilliant. He's the founder of Cop Talk, of what it's all about. He took it from being a technical type of occupation where I don't think that much was required. I mean, I think they had to have a high school diploma and, be willing, and they had to have a certain social profile and, and psychological profile. I think that those were the kind of criteria. I don't really know because I'm not a police officer. I was probably never meant to be one. I have an 8th house stellium, so I'm very detective-like, and I like to dig in deep and understand something. And thus, this is what I'm doing, and this is how it's manifested in me. But for him, it manifested as he was the G-man, and he loved the show, the 5th house, right? That comic book, the G-man. Movies were made about it, and he played to it. That kind of that sun, right? In the 5th house, Leonian, wanted people to see him as strong and capable. But he had this wife, for the most part, his second in charge, that he hired without the qualifications that he so dearly claimed to be necessary in order to work for the FBI. Now, how did he end up with this particular person? That is all by itself very interesting. He's conducting the interview. The gentleman basically points out that the curtains need replaced, that they're not the right color. They're kind of shabby looking. Well, because Edgar, his mom had been so involved in his childhood and his life in positive ways, negative ways, right? Both, where she just overshadowed him in some ways. He came right in, this second in charge, and just by his very words, fit that pattern. And he was hired on the spot. So, over the years, of course, they developed a relationship. No big deal. But that relationship immediately became inappropriate. Boundaries were inappropriate. The first time that they shared a meal together, his second in charge said, I have to have lunch with you every single day. I never want to miss a lunch with you. For which, for the most part, that is how things carried forward. But up to a point, until one day, 10th house, Uranus, shocking, unexpected, surprising, revolutionizing, troubling, penetrating government, where he had his job, where he was the supervisor, where this man was second in charge. He upset him. He upset him like a lover. And he got shunned temporarily. So there were many indications that the relationship was more emotional than it was appropriate work kind of relationship. And they remained in a relationship in this way up to his wingman's death. So that's pretty solid that this was a very important human to him. Now, he never really acknowledged, never knew that he was gay, but that shadow suggests he knew. And therefore, the kinds of information that he would dig up on his political opponents, enemies, and those he was after was sexual in nature. The one thing he felt dark and deviant about, that Sun, Pluto, Neptune, Saturn, Mars. It just kind of fires it all off, right? And how he takes that information that he works in government. He's developed this program in the 12th and first house and uses it against you. Fascinating. Now, before I go, I have a couple of more little details. He ended up dying in office of a heart attack. And fifth house, heart. Basically, no big surprise. He gave his life for his career. And what he gave to make the FBI what it is today is a beautiful thing. And so I don't want to in any way seem like I'm despairing him. I am not. I rather admire him, if you want to know the truth. But and myself, I have had issues with, I have a opening quincunx Scorpio angle. And I've very much had questions whether or not I was gay. And probably more so I'm gay than I'm not, according to my chart. I just didn't choose that way. But I know that opening is different than closing. He might have anxiety. He might have tension that he's unaware of. Now, there's one last detail that I want to touch upon. As an astrologer trained, we have been taught that past life readings are really not possible. And I don't disagree with that in some ways. And in other ways, I've always been somebody who believes I'm reincarnated. So to be honest and true to myself, I'm going to go ahead and point this out because I find it fascinating. And I very much believe in reincarnation. I believe we have many lifetimes. I believe we keep redeveloping our character till we get it right. So how would I look at this chart if I wanted to see about his past life? Well, where I'd look is on his nodes. And he has North Node in the second house where he's being asked to do this development where he has Moon in Pisces next to his mom, second house. He's being asked right there to bring it up in this confusing Pisces diffused kind of lost place, right? So in order to understand this, then we need to go over to where this North Node goes, and that goes to fifth house where he has Neptune in Gemini, where it's saying that he was somebody that institutionally could provide deep information or provided deep information institutionally. Now that almost sounds like we're talking about this lifetime, and probably we are. I personally think our character develops over time and lifetimes, not just this life. So then we have South Node in the 8th house that suggests that he was an expert in the 8th house at something. What would you be an expert at in the 8th house? You could be a surgeon. You could be, somebody who digs deep, a miner, somebody who has fields that you plow. But it's also the detective, the top cop. It's also relevant here again. And it's in Virgo, meaning that something about his past was damaged or injured. The details. And so one of my questions about this chart that I really wonder, and I just took you on this little exercise, And actually, if you go down into, the fact that he felt like he wasn't potent as a man, it leaves me asking an additional question. Was he a woman in a past life, and was he married to his mom? I believe that, and I know that's trippy. People are going to go, "Oh my God, that's gross," and it kind of is, right? On one hand, but what if we don't know, right? And what if he came to this lifetime somewhat confused about his sexuality because his past life he was a woman? Very, very possible. Very possible. And these are questions we don't ask. And it isn't helpful to the community that is gay, because we don't help them in any way by withholding information. And I know we're not withholding information, but ignorance is withholding information. Being ignorant to what the facts might be is withholding, even if you don't think so. We have an obligation to grow and learn at all times, and up to and including about people of different persuasions and ideas. And so, that part, I believe it's very possible that Edgar Cayce was a woman in a past life. That is, his mother may have been his spouse, but he may have had a different spouse. The man that he's wingman with could have been his spouse. We don't know. But with that, understand that there's a lot that could have led to why he is the way he is. And because I can't interview him, do keep in mind that very much changes how things could have possibly turned out. So I don't stand in judgment. I mean, we stand in judgment of ourselves enough in life without any ado. But with that, I thank you for joining me here today. Please do hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this reading, please do leave a comment. And if you've had some confusion, if you think you've got a Scorpio angle opening or closing quincunx, please do leave a message. Leave a comment. That's how I grow. And I will definitely get back with you. I have a strong inclination here and want to be a part of the solution and not the problem. And with that, I thank you very much for joining me here. And if you would like a reading, do contact me. I am starting to provide readings. I'm done with my program in 6 weeks, and I'm excited. Thank you very much.